In today's video, we are going to be using JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, no frameworks, to create a hash router or to create a URL router just in pure JavaScript. Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of DevDrawer. Today we're going to be building out a SPA router using JavaScript. So SPA is a single page application. You may be familiar with it, you may not be familiar with it. Basically, it's using JavaScript to create like dynamic URL router. And there's two ways to do it. One is to do it using, we're going to be using vanilla.js. There's multiple ways to do it, but what we're actually doing is vanilla.js. There's frameworks out there for it. But you can use like the hash routes, or you can use the page routes. And I'll show you how to do both of them in this tutorial. Basically, it's going to, they have pros and cons for both of them, and I'll get into those as we're doing them. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is just get our HTML set up. So I'm just going to use that, and let's just title this, let's say JS SPA routing. Okay, so we should be able to see all of this in real time as we're doing it. I'm not going to be very visually heavy on this, so that's the reason why I got such a small browser window compared to the large development window, because pretty much everything's going to be in code. But in order to get started, we need to first create a few things. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to create, we're going to do, let's go ahead and add Bootstrap into it. So I'm going to copy over some Bootstrap. Not that we're going to be using it right now, but just so whenever I get ready to use it, we're actually going to be able to kind of segment the content from the navigation links. So let's do div container, and then inside of this we want to have div main, and then I think we can go ahead and just proceed from there. So first, let's set up the navigation, and we're going to be doing the URL routes. So whenever you're using the URL routes, it'll work for the most part, but you need to configure your web server to serve the index.html as the main file for the SPA route paths. This is better for SEO and it's more user friendly. However, if you're going along with this tutorial or you're trying to do it locally, unless you are, right now I'm just using the live server in VS Code. So unless you're using an actual server that has your htaccess file that's pointing everything to your index.html, it's not going to work if you click on the links directly. So just keep that in mind while you're working with it. The hash version of it works differently, so it actually can manipulate that a little bit better. But the first part we're going to do is using just the URLs inside of the router, and I'll show you what I mean by it not working sometimes, because I don't have the ability inside of live server in VS Code to write an htaccess file that it actually recognizes. So you need to have something in place to configure the web server to serve this index.html as the main page in order for it to work. So let's go ahead and get started with this, and I'm just going to do a nav, and then inside of this I'm just going to add 3 links. So we're going to do, and let's just have this one be just a regular slash. That's going to be our home link, and then we can do another one, and this one is going to be our about page. So let's do about us, and then another one is going to be, let's just say contact, and we can do contact us. Okay, so now we have the main navigation that we want, but we need to also have it where it actually displays the content. So we're going to create another div, and we're just going to give it an ID of content. We're not going to put anything inside of it because we don't need to. Everything's going to be dynamically populated. So let's create a script reference. So we're going to do script source equals, and I'm just going to name these according to what they are. So this is going to be JS URL router.js, and I'll create that file now. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. It's going to be called JS, and then inside of this we're going to create a new file called URL router.js. So inside of this file, this is going to be what controls the URL routing. Normally you wouldn't call it URL router, you would just call it like router.js, but I'm actually going to have a router for the URL and a router for the hash, and I'm going to use them at the same time, so I don't want anything overriding. Okay, so first let's create a document listener that's going to basically listen for any link clicks inside of our nav. So let's do document.add event listener, and it's going to be click. And then we're going to pass E so that we can do the prevent default. And then we're just going to write some functionality for it. So let's do constant variable target. That's not what I wanted to do. Curly brackets. So target equals E. So we're pulling in the click information. So then we're going to do if target does not match nav A, and this is basically going to be saying that if there's a click outside of nav A, we don't necessarily want it to return this functionality. Depending on how you're writing the application, you may want it to return this functionality if you're going to have your entire site be dynamic. But for right now, we're doing, if it's not inside of our nav, we're just going to return it and not continue the function. And then we're going to do our E prevent default so that it doesn't do the default action of the link. And then we're going to create a function. We're going to call it URL route. And again, these function names and everything is very specific to the URL router. I mean, you would just do something like route. But for this, we're going to be setting up our own routing in two different places at the same time. So I'm trying to keep the naming structure different. Okay, so let's do, I want to create a constant function. So we're going to do constant URL route, and this is going to be equal to the event that's being passed to it, and then we're just going to create that function. So basically this creates a function that washes the URL, and then it's going to call another function that we're going to create called URL handler event, or URL location handler. So let's do a constant URL location handler, and then we'll get into actually building out the functions. So async, and then we want it to be async in order for it to listen actively for it. So this is just going to be creating a function that handles the URL location, and we're going to call that function inside of here. So inside of here, we want to do event equals event or window dot event, and essentially what this is doing is it's getting the window event if the argument for the event has not been passed to it, and that's just basically telling it that something's been clicked on and this is where it's trying to go. Okay, and then we want to do event prevent default just to prevent it from doing any additional code. We just want it to do what we're telling it to do here. So let's do window dot history, and this is basically for being able to tell the browser which state it's in. So if you want to go back, this will allow you to go back without breaking that too much. So the push state, you can see here it says data any unused string, then the URL, and then the return or void as the return. Basically data is, we're going to be passing an array because it's the state that's being passed to it. We don't really care. We just want to, you could leave this null, or you can put in a blank. And over here on this unused string part, it's basically unused now. So it's something that you don't have to put anything in there. You can use a blank there too. And then the actual target link, we want to do event.target.href, and that's going to be pointing to the href of the link that we're passing. And then we finally want to call our URL location handler. Okay, so now going down inside of here, this is where it actually grabs the responses that we're trying to push out. So before we come into here, I want to create another constant variable up here that's going to be our not a variable, an array. of objects, and this is going to be what the actual routes are. So we're going to create an object that maps the URL to the template, and then we're also going to add the title and description so that it's a little more SEO friendly. So let's do constant URL routes. This is going to be equal to an object, and then we want to have first a 404, because that 404, if it doesn't find what it's looking for, it's just going to default to whatever template we have set up for the 404. So let's do first our template, and then we're just going to do create a folder called templates, and it's going to be 404.html. Okay, and then we're also going to add in, we'll add this in later, but we're going to do title, we'll just have it blank right now, and then description, so that way we control the metadata, and you can put whatever you want to in here. Just right now I'm doing it this way to kind of simplify it. So now let's go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to call it templates, and inside of this we're going to create a new file called 404.html, and then let's just say something like h1 page missing. Okay, so we don't need that anymore. And let's create another route that is going to be the main, the home page. So we have our slash is our home page, because that's how we defined it in the navigation. So I'm just going to copy this over, and then we can change this as we go. So let's do templates, and we're just going to do index.html, and then let's create another route, and this one's going to be /about. And you can add as many pages as you want here. All the functionality, as long as the page exists in the templates file, then you're good. And then finally, let's do contact, and let's create those pages. So contact, HTML, about, and index. So new file, let's do index.html, and let's say home page, create a new file, where it's going to be about.html, and this one's going to be about us, and then a new file, contact.html, and contact us. Okay, so we don't need these templates anymore because we're not doing anything else with them. Okay, so now we have these routes, and then we'll add in the title and description once we get to that part, but for right now, let's go ahead and finish out our URL handler. So again, we're just creating a function that's going to handle the URL location, and first thing, in order to do that, we need to get the URL path. So we're going to do const location equals window.location path name, and then if the path or the location is 0, we want it to set to the primary route. So we're going to do if location.length equals 0, we want the location to equal this slash, so we know that we're on the home page. So basically, if it gets on the site and there is nothing that comes after the slash, then it's going to default to this, and it's going to pull this route here. Okay, so let's go down, and so now we're going to get the route object from the URL routes object. So let's do const route equals await. So await fetch. No, not on that part yet. So we're going to pull the URL routes, which is this constant variable, this object array that we've created up here. So the URL routes is going to equal to the location. So the location is going to be defined here either using the slash, or it's going to be /about, /contact, or it's going to be something that doesn't exist, and it's going to hit the 404. So if it doesn't exist, then we want it to display the 404. So we're going to do URL routes, and then we're just going to pass in 404. Okay, so now we come down and do the await. So we're going to do constant HTML equals await fetch, and we're going to be fetching that route template. So route template, and then we're going to be actually pushing out the response as text. So then response, this is going to push out to the response dot text, and close that out because it's a function. Okay. All right, so now we want to, so we have our HTML defined, and it's basically it's grabbing the template. If it has a response, then it's going to be taking the text from that response and pushing it into our constant HTML variable. So now we want to take document.getElementById, and we created a content div that was going to hold our inner HTML. And this is just going to equal the HTML that we've done above. So now if we go over here, this should technically work. So we got about us, contact us, homepage. And if you notice, whenever this thing first loads, it doesn't actually run the route because it's not, there's nothing on, like, it's not being set immediately. So what we need to do in order for it to be set immediately is we need to do URL location handler, and we just run that function as soon as the page loads, and now you can see that it's actually changing to this. So there's a few more things that we need to add in this. So we need to add a event listener to the window that watches for URL changes. So we're going to do window dot on pop state. So on pop state is going to be equal to the URL location handler. And then finally, window.route is going to be equal to URL route. So essentially, this right here, this window pop state, is going to add an event listener to the window that watches for the URL changes. And then this window.route is going to call the URL function to handle the initial URL, which is essentially the same thing that this one does. So that's pretty much it for, okay, so this is what I was telling you about. If you don't have your index.html set up and you go to access these URLs directly, they won't work. The only way it's going to work is if it loads the JavaScript first, which is on your index.html, and then it'll work. So if we go back to our main over here and we click on contact us, of course it works because it's loading it via HTML rather than trying to access this URL itself. So the way you get around this, like I said before, is modify your htaccess to make sure that your index.html is the main file for your server, that it's being served as the server file, and then that'll get around it. I can't do that in this tutorial because I'm using live server on VS Code and it doesn't have that kind of functionality built into it. But you know, you don't really need that in this case. And then once we start using the hashtags, you won't need that at all. But for right now, you know, this works the way that we want it to, so it's displaying the content that we want. Okay, so actually, you know what? I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to label these so that we know which ones we're using. So let me go ahead and create, we're using Bootstrap for the layout. So let me create the layout over here because we're fixing to add some more stuff in here. Okay, so let's do div row, and then I want to do div column. I want to have 2 columns, and this second column, let's just do so medium 8. Okay, and then I'm going to separate the navigation, so I'm going to do div.card body, and then inside of this I'm going to add this navigation over here, just so I can kind of show you what they are separated. So whenever I go to put in the hash the hash changes, you'll be able to kind of tell the difference between the two. Okay, so now we have this. It's not pretty, but it kind of serves the purpose. So I'm going to put over here that this is using URLs. Okay, so that way we can kind of differentiate between the two. Actually, let me go ahead and take this and do a 6 just to make it stretch out. What can I do here? Let me just add a break tag. There we go. Okay, so this is using URLs, and this is the content that's being passed, so that's what we're wanting. Okay, so now, as you can see over here, when we click on About Us, the JS SPA routing doesn't change, and if I inspect this, where's my inspect at? Let's see, developer tools. That's weird, it's not showing up. Okay, the reason why it wasn't showing up because I had to update Chrome. So now if I go to inspect, it shows up. So I'm going to expand the head out. You can see here, it doesn't have a description in it. The title is hard coded. So what I want to do is I want to change that. So in order to make that work, I'm going to come back over to my URL router, and I'm going to create a constant variable called constant URL page title equals a string, and I'm just going to take this HTML from here, and I'm going to paste it in here because I'm going to be using that to set up the titles. So the first one, let's go ahead and do something like 404 and then pass a pipe symbol, and then we're going to be passing in the URL page title. Okay, so I can kind of copy this for all of them. So let's take, let's see, I think it's Alt, away, there, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to change this one to home, this one to about us, and then this one to contact us. Okay, and then the description for this is just going to be page not found. Let's say this is the home page. This is the About Us page. And then this is the Contact Us page. Okay, so now we have our titles, descriptions, all that stuff. So now we need to add that inside of here. So currently it's just producing the content. So I want to make it where it produces the content, and then it's going to also add the title. So we're going to do document.title, and it's going to be equal to the route.title. So we got the route template here, and it's parsing it out. So then we have another variable that we created called route title, and then finally we want to do document.query selector, and this is going to be searching for a meta name equals description, and then we're going to do set attribute, and then we're just going to pass the content of that to match the route.description. Okay, so now if we go back to here, we can see now it says home, then this one says about us, this one says contact us. So if we go back over here, we can also see that, well, it's not adding the description. Why is it not adding the description? So we got document, query selector, meta name, description, set attribute, content, route description. I think I might need to add the description, yeah. So we need to have a, because it's not finding it right now, so we need to do meta name equals description, and the content, we're just going to have it blank. Okay, there we go. So now if we expand this out, we have the description. This is the home page, about us, contact us. Okay, and right now if I type in contact to, it's going to break it because I'm trying to access that URL manually. But if you had your index.html set up, this would actually display the 404 information or the 404 page. So right now can't show you that because don't have it set up that way. But now we have home, about us, contact us, everything's changing the way it should, so that's great. Now again, one of the benefits of using this way is that it's usually better for SEO, because SEO they kind of expect links pages themselves, And it's also more user-friendly because that's also what your individual users would also expect. So the way that I'm going to show you how to do it is using hashes as well. So the hashes, they're not the best route for SEO, and it's also unusual from some users. So I wouldn't really use it on a website. So for this one, I would say like the use case of it would be for websites. This one that I'm fixing to add, however, is going to be, I would say, for like apps or simple landing pages, stuff like that that you want to, it's not necessarily that you need to have everything indexed. And there is also frameworks out there that kind of handle that using the hash routing. It's for them, they manipulate the code in a way where it is good for SEO. But again, you're dealing with something that, your users may not be necessarily friendly with. It might not be something that you're used to. So, I would kind of pick and choose which one you want to use. So with using the hashes, again, it's going to be where I recommend using on apps or simple landing pages. Using the URLs, recommend it being on websites themselves. So basically, the difference between these are going to be, so our home is going to stay the same, so we're not too worried about that. But like if we wanted to do this, we're going to do something like about, so that it's not linking out to a new URL, it's linking out to a hashed version of the URL. So if we come back over here right now, if we go to click on this, it's not going to do anything, but you can see how it changes the URL. We come over here, it changes the URL like this without the hash on it. So let's go back home, and then we need to do the code that that sets this up. So let's create a new file, and we're going to call it hashrouter.js. And I'm actually going to copy some of the code from here because a lot of it's the same, but the way that the URLs are handled is a bit different. And then also I'm going to go ahead and add this in here as well. So we're going to do hash router. Okay, so for our hash router, I'm going to copy over, we can keep the constant page title, and then I'm also going to copy over our URL routes constant variable, but we're going to change the name because you can't have the same, we're calling both of them at the same time, so we don't want to have them the same. So all of this can stay the same except for this. So we're going to change this to about, and we're going to change this to just contact, and then all of that's still good, so we're still good there. Let's see, so the URL location handler, I'm going to copy this because the function is very similar to what we did, but I'll show you the changes. So we're going to, can't use the same function name, so we're just going to call this one location handler, and then our location is going to change. So instead of doing window.location.pathname, we're going to change this to hash, and we also want to do a replace on it. So we want to replace the hash because we're not using the hashes up here. So if we wanted to, we can come in here and do something like that in double quotes, and it would work, but I don't want it to be like that. I want it to actually make it a little bit more fluid. So we're going to replace the hash in our URL. Okay, so we're still needing to check for the length. If it doesn't have a length, then we want it to pull the home route. So we're still doing this one. We called it differently. We called it routes. So let's get rid of the URL routes, and we're just going to be passing the route to it. So now we have our location, and then if it's not, we want it to pass 404. And this is pretty much the same as well, all the way down. So this part should be good. It's actually a little bit simpler to create it this way, just because it's a little more concise. So let's do window dot add event listener, and we're going to be listening for a hash change. So a hash change, and then basically this is, we're creating a function that is watching the hash and then calls this function that we have up here. And then we want to pass location handler. So it's just waiting for a hash change, and then it's going to call the function that actually runs the code. And then again, we want it to do on page load, so we're going to do location handler, and we're just going to call that function. And that's pretty much it. Everything else should be the same. So we're still getting the title, we're still producing the content. So let's see how that works. So if we come over here and we hit home, okay, so home's not working yet. About us is working, contact us. Home is not. So home is not working there either. URL page title has already been defined. Let's see, that's in URL router. So, oh, okay, well I gotta change this. So it's not URL page title. Let's just change it to something like page title. Okay, then let's just change all of that. All right, so that should get rid of that. So home page now. Okay, hash router line 29. So assignment to constant variable. Where did I define this at? Constant variable. Okay, so that was another thing. Constant variable won't let you change it, so we're going to change this to just a var. So we can change it in real time. There we go. So now if we hit about us, well, that's working. Why isn't this working? Okay, let me see. So this, it's like the down here is overriding it. Let me look at the code real quick. So, oh, okay. So we're not supposed to be calling the nav here because the nav is used in our URL router, and it's basically anything that you touch that matches that is returning this information, but that information doesn't exist. So now that should work. So if we switch over to this, there we go. About us, contact us, home, and then we can also switch to the URL version of it. Perfect. Okay, so now that is essentially how you create either a hash router or a URL router in Vanilla.js. I mean, there is frameworks out there that you can use to do this. If you're using React or something like that, they have built-in modules that'll handle this kind of thing. But if you're wanting to do just a simple landing page or something like that, or you're wanting to build an app from scratch, these two are the ones that I would go with. You just basically can circumnavigate having to create something using a framework. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something from it. This is pretty cool to know if you're doing JavaScript development or just doing front-end development in general. So I appreciate you watching. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed and you like these kind of videos, I try to do them at least once a week. So hit the subscribe button for me and the bell notification so you can see when next time I'm doing one. But I think that'll be it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.